Hi. How's everyone doing? Having a good Unite? So we're here to talk about cinematics and storytelling in Unity. My name is Mike Wuetherick. I'm the product manager overseeing the timeline team in Montreal.
And I'm Adam Myhill, head of cinematic.
I'm Sean. I'm one of the engineers on the timeline team.
Cool. So we're here to talk about timeline and the Playable API. So this feature set introduces 3 new major additions to the Unity toolset. So we have timeline itself, we have the Playable API, and then obviously Cinemachine, which we saw in the keynote. So timeline itself, it adds full multi-track sequencing in Unity. It obviously supports animation, audio, any number of custom tracks. Gives you the traditional NLE workflow that you're used to, natively integrated into the Unity suite. That's sort of a big thing, is the fact that it talks to all the native Unity systems directly. So a couple of the objectives when we were building it is that it was super extensible. That's kind of one of the core tenets of it. It has a familiar workflow. You're not dealing with other custom interfaces or UI and the native integration. And as you'll see when we start showing you some demos, it's far more than a cutscene tool. So we're just going to start and show you some videos. We thought the best way to talk about timeline was to actually show you some stuff that we've been building. Adam and I were working on content for Unite and the keynote, and we actually recorded a good chunk of it while we were building it. So this is a multi-track sequence in timeline. You can see there's any number of tracks. Some of these are keyframed directly within timeline. A number of them are running root motion animations. The fight scene here is actually the identical fight scene that you saw in the keynote. We've just retargeted it to a couple different characters. We've got any number of different objects flying in. Again, combining root motion with keyframes, moving the objects around the world. And then obviously the camera system layering it on top. We're showing and hiding visual effects. It really changes the workflow when you're building scenes in Unity.
Something we want to mention, like we grabbed these assets off the asset store. That isn't the prettiest demo. The point to take away is not like, wow, that was an amazing cutscene, but that we threw it together literally in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
It goes together really quickly. You drag assets, you throw it on a timeline, you start animating them, you can scrub, and you can just start working right away. So.
Yeah, as you can see in these demos here, when we're hitting play, I'm actually just walking around with a first-person controller, just navigating the scene as you would normally, and the whole timeline plays while you're playing, while you're working in the scene. Even while you're in play mode, you can scrub the timeline and continue to iterate on your content. The timeline and all of its content are assetized, so it saves changes even while you're working in play mode. This gives you very quick iteration time.
On the left here, you'll see that there's multiple scenes in here. So we're using multi-scene, and there's multiple sequences in each scene. So like these guys are animating on their own timeline track, and then there's higher level timeline tracks, and there's multiple timeline tracks, and then we're driving them all from the one master one. So part of this video, we sped it up. Basically, this is us making this entire sequence at 4 times speed. You can see that there's a lot of sequences or a lot of timelines that are going at once.
One really interesting thing here is this recorded sequence is something I keyframed in timeline. You can save that out as an animation clip, and now I'm reapplying that same animation to any number of other objects within the scene. This is extremely powerful. And here I'm combining it with a preset root motion, so you have the root motion working with these anim clips that you're creating within timeline. The whole workflow, again, completely changes how you work with content and sequences within Unity. See what we're doing here.
So we're still adding more mechs.
Again, the same animation clip. You can have the slight offsets. It's very, very quick to work with it. Having worked with Unity for going on 8, 9 years, trying to do the same thing with the current workflow would be extremely time-consuming. You can see the iteration speed and adding the new box select, the integration directly with the animation window, where you can actually scrub either window and the whole thing scrubs.
And when you bring something onto the timeline, whatever it is, you get that clip. Those clips blend, and they They take advantage of all the timeline interface components, so you can actually blend ideas together, whatever they are, whatever your custom tracks are, whatever your custom clips are. So here we just made a really quick Cinemachine track. That's the one at the top, and you can see it just threw down 4 shots. And then you just make 4 virtual cameras. And this is the other way around of working, like inverse kinematics for camera. What you do is you make a shot, and then you pick what you want to target, and then you set the compositional rule up. So you can see on shot 2, we want to track her face. We want her on the right side of the screen. Shot 1, the other guy. And what you do is your shots they're ideas. It's like a director talking to a camera operator. And this is what we want to get for this shot. And you can see there's like a blue area. And that is an area where you can, it's kind of like squishy, if you will. And the target can move around in that based on a dampening factor. So you can have the camera rigidly compose onto something, or you can have it sort of loosely follow it.
And the brilliant thing is when you start looking at, like what we're doing here, is blending between these ideas. You have the drones flying in, and it smoothly transitions into your existing sequence.
Yeah, so you can see we do a cut. We got the opening shot, and then we've got her shot, and it's like we just jam those 2 clips over top of each other, and then it just goes from a tracking shot of the drone coming through, blending right to a shot of her face. And it changes how you think about things, because you're not just like keyframing everything. It's not just this one camera long keyframe. You got to just make sure all the curves are working. You just deal, okay, that shot wants to do this shot wants to do that, and oh man, what if I blend those 2 together?
Yeah,
and
especially when you're starting to do that iteration. You have this whole sequence, you realize you need some time at the front. You just drag the whole thing, the cameras still work. You're not having to re-keyframe anything from scratch.
Now, you can keyframe stuff, and what actually works really well is you put keyframe transforms on the camera body, so you can have like do dolly moves, but most of the time, compositionally, your subject wants to be on screen. So if you've got really good dampening controls for how aggressive you'd like to track something and where on screen, then why would you want to keyframe the camera just to try to keep track of something? It's sort of backwards. Just tell the camera what you want to look at and where you want it on screen, and let it continually figure that out for you. So another thing to note is on the top left window, the scene view. You can see the view frustums from all the cameras. And the active camera's white, and the inactive cameras are gray. So it's really fast if you just want to see what shots you've got lined up and where all the cameras are looking. And as cameras blend, you'll see them. You'll see the camera in white blend between each shot. So it's useful to keep track of how many cameras you have in the scene and what they're looking at and where they are in the world.
Another really powerful thing is the dynamic noise. You can add handheld shaky cam. You can add, so it isn't just hard tracking to things. You can actually add the dynamic noise.
You can see that on the right side of the screen right now. There's a whole noise, a procedural noise set up. It's as many layers as you want. It's on position or orientation. And the nice thing about procedural noise is it's super light, so it doesn't really have any overhead at all. And of course it blends, everything blends. So if you can blend from a static locked off camera to a really handheld noisy one, everything will blend really nicely. Okay, so you can kind of see that we're almost, it's not amazing because we did it super quick, but within a few minutes, we've got a bunch of cuts and a bunch of blends, and we're almost at the end of assembling this whole camera sequence super quickly.
So one thing to note about the Cinemachine stuff, it's virtual cameras. So you aren't adding multiple Unity cameras directly within the scene. You're creating these virtual cameras that apply their settings to the actual Unity camera. So you have things like your visual effects and everything all set up on one main camera, and then it applies those virtual settings, your field of view and everything, all blending directly.
Yeah, so each virtual camera, you can have as many as you want, and you can blend them together as you've seen, and then it'll post those transforms to the main Unity camera.
This next one, we're going to show some ideas that we've been playing around with. Like visual effects is another one where trying to iterate on your effects can be very time-consuming using the existing Unity inspector view. So here we have 4 different tracks with some audio all synced together, and you're actually working on each of these individual effects separately. The particle system is something that's being keyframed directly within timeline. So it exposes all of these built-in Unity properties for your objects, and you can actually work with them in the timeline.
We know this isn't super pretty, but it's kind of famous because we think this is the very first VFX that's ever gone into timeline. So it's not gorgeous, we know, but if there's any VFX artists out there, you know how frustrating it is to do offsets of elements by tumping 4.2 seconds, 4.3 seconds, and here it's just all just visual. So you can see we got multiple tracks: the fire, the smoke, the embers, and the flames.
Yeah, so now we've muted 3 of the tracks. We're just going to focus on the top one, and we can add our own keyframes. And then you can open up the curves directly within timeline and manipulate the particle and how it actually works. Again, it totally changes the workflow for just about anything within Unity. And these become their own little mini timelines that you can trigger on events within Unity. You can trigger your own events within timelines, so it'll do something and then trigger an event and or start other actions.
That part's really cool. You get this whole VFX setup, and then you just collapse it down, and it's just one sequence, and then you can actually use that as a clip and put it in other sequences, and just sort of treat it as one idea. But then if you actually want to go back and blow it open, much like After Effects, how you can like nest sequences.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just mind-blowing to work like this for VFX versus the old way. This is going to be a real time saver for a lot of people.
Cool. Should we just skip to the next
Yeah,
one?
kind of moving on. Actually, one last point I want to mention: you can, when you're in play mode, it saves it all, so you don't lose data. So anything you do on timeline, once you kick out of play mode and go back to edit mode, that's preserved. So that's a nice feature too. Moving on. This is another video. It's in the Space City world, and we wanted to just show a little bit more about doing really quick camera layout on a scene. We got this girl, and she goes down. She shoots and just blended between 2 shots. There's one shot up in the sky, and then there's one shot that's this shot. And just set the composition up, and you can see how those 2 shots blend. And then, a reverse shot. And these just went in so quickly. And you can it's really nice when you get the audio in there and you're scrubbing to have camera cuts on beats, and you're really choreographing a sequence to all work well together. So you're adjusting the camera cuts to match the animation. If the animation doesn't quite work, you just slip that, and if that doesn't work, then you can move the camera. Like, you've got access to everything at the same time.
Yeah, so this one's combining a number. The agent is working with a number of individual root motion clips. Whatever the target on the bottom is one long root motion clip, and then we have keyframed individual animations that we've done within timeline. Then we have one of our custom tracks where you can just activate game objects. So you can turn game objects active or deactive at certain points. So the effect for the muzzle flash gets turned on at the appropriate time.
And down the bottom, the VFX explosions, those little guys are out of time. Just move them to line up with the animation. Yeah. And here we're just getting a cut to land just right. This is cool. This looks really, it's really useful, the thumbnail track. So it renders from the game camera, and it populates an image onto the thumbnail track, and they update based on the scale of the thumbnail track. And you can pause and hide the refresh so it doesn't get into your way. But it's really handy, especially if you've got super heavy scenes. You can use this as a way to see what's going on at any point in the timeline. There's an information display with the frames or time, which is handy. You can change the size of them. So this has come in really recently to timeline, but it's one of our favorites. It's a really pretty little element. Let's move on.
So these guys have done a great job of showing you how timeline works and some examples. I'll talk a little bit about the design, the implementation, and I'm going to start with the Playable API. So everyone knows what the Playable API is, right? Everyone uses it? No? No? All right, so the Playable API is an experimental feature that dates back to 5.2 in animation. It's really the system that we use to do blend trees internally. So how many people have done an animator controller? right? An animator controller is your first exposure to the Playable API. You just don't know it. So the API itself is a script API where you can change the blend trees on the fly. And I've seen some people use it pretty successfully. The classic example is you can then swap out an animator controller somewhere in your scene to have context, right? So you have a character that walks over, grabs an object, right? There's a specific animation for that object. You can do that all with scripting. And we introduced this, and it's always had larger ambitions. But it's accessible now directly through the animation. All right, so just to give you guys maybe a little context to how this works, I grabbed this off the documentation. But here we have 2 clips, right? We're going to make a mixer that'll blend those 2 clips together, and we're going to tell our animator to play it. And then in our update function, we're just going to set the input weights of those 2 things. And so this will allow you to, through script, to adjust the animation. Right? So why does this matter? We actually built timeline on top of this Playable API. So when you build a timeline, you're editing a playable graph. Now, a playable is our runtime version. It's short, it's efficient, and it's underneath the hood of what's happening, right? So a timeline, you can think of it a lot like an animator controller. There's a serialized asset that you're working on and you're editing, and then when the appropriate time comes, it goes and generates this beautiful graph under the hood. Now, for timeline, we need to extend this beyond animation. We have to deal with audio, we have to deal with scripts, and some other future things as well. So to give you guys a quick example, here we have, on the bottom, an animation track. So in our animation track, we have, we've bound it to our game object. We have 4 clips, right? We're going to have running, and then the guy's going to jump, and then he's going to land, and then maybe he'll run again. So what we're going to do, when timeline generates its graph, it's going to say, well, I have a track, so I know I need a mixer, and I'm going to generate 4 clip playables, and timeline itself is just going to control the blend of that mixer to each playable to make sequence from one to the other, to the other, to the other. Right? So this is pretty straightforward, and this is something you can do with an animator controller. Fairly easy. It's just a different representation of being able to do that. But we've extended this to other types of tracks. So if we think about it, right, an animation clip and an audio clip, they're a data source. So we're going to play them and we're going to mix them, and then we may tack on effects to do that. So when we release the timeline editor, we'll also release a suite of audio playables. So if you want to use the Playable API to do audio, well, you'll be able to do that too. So we end up with a similar scenario, slightly different here, where we'll have our 2 clips on the timeline, even blended together, and then we'll apply an echo filter as an example. And when timeline builds, it'll generate this graph internally and play it. So to do this, we're adding a couple things to the Playable API. The first one is script playables, and this isn't necessarily new. If anyone has used it, it used to be the custom animation playable, but there are playables that are simply written in C#. So if you want to have your own type of playable, have something that happens while the graph's evaluated, right? You can write it in C#. And the way they work with timeline is you're passed in, information about where are you currently, so that you can perform your evaluation. If it's an animation playable, it will, you'll pass in the time and it'll say, okay, I'll evaluate the pose at this time. Right? But the problem is playables are not serializable objects. They're meant to be small, efficient, reproducible. if you think about it, you can apply an animator controller to 4 or 5 different guys, and they will each generate their own graph. So we want to have the same concept. So our serializable objects, our playable assets are simply serializable objects who just inject playables into their graph, right? And they're fairly trivial. What this allows us to do is if you make a playable asset, if you define your own playable asset subclass, we can automatically detect that, oh, hey, we can create clips of this type. So it's really, really easy to extend timeline. Right? So to give you guys a really, really contrived and trivial example here, there's a couple classes here which let you play with the field of view in timeline on the main camera. So on the bottom, we have our playable asset. And all we're doing is defining what data do we want the user to give us, right? We want them to give us the field of view. And on the top, we have, OK, what does this do, right? So when the prepare frame is called, that's when you scrub or when it's played. Every time it needs to evaluate at a new time, all we're going to say is set the camera's field of view to this value. So by having the playable asset, it'll define a new clip type, and then the playable will do the actual work when the game's running. Now, the one thing that we have to implement in the asset is we have to say, oh, hey, here's the playable that I create. The power of this is it doesn't have to be one, it can be a whole subgraph. Right? So, did it?
Awesome.
Cool. So we can show a video of some custom playables in action. Does this play automatically? All right. So here we created a custom playable type. We're going to control some lights on the fly.
You'll see, this is Mike. He actually types this fast. There's very little code.
Yeah, the really
just
cool
made a
thing
new
with this
custom
is how
track.
much you can
That's-
get done with almost no code.
Yeah.
So up top, we've exposed a couple values. We've got our lights and then an intensity. And then, again, during the prepare frame, we read in what the intensity is, and we apply it to all of the lights.
Look at that. There's a custom track, light intensity control track. And then it makes your own inspector panel. You see how many lights. Just learned this trick recently. You can multi-drag and drop things onto there. If you guys didn't know, I found this out just recently. It's super awesome. And then look at this. Boom. One track, it's controlling the intensity of these lights.
Yeah, we set auto keyframe, starts setting keys, essentially.
So this isn't a very dramatic demo, but the point here is you can make custom tracks and clips for whatever you want to drive in your game. And that part's really powerful. And because it's a clip, you can make more clips, and then you can drag the ends, and you can scale them, and you can blend them, and all that timeline interface stuff you get for free. So it's going to be really exciting to see what people do with that, driving who knows what in your game.
So that's great, right? We're able to let the user extend timeline however they want. And that's, like we've said earlier, that's a really important feature. So timeline, the reason I bring up the playable assets is this is the core feature that we built timeline on. So timeline assets themselves are simply playable assets. They're simply assets that generate this sort of tree. Right? And the tree, because it has animation tracks, it has audio tracks, and we have these custom types that we can make do whatever we want, they all generate parts of the tree. So tracks themselves are simply playable assets. Clips themselves are simply playable assets. So they all do their work of injecting to build a larger tree. The design of this is basically so we can extend this beyond just timeline. And we can do things of a more advanced nature. So what we have here is the graph is generated from a simple timeline. And the timeline playable at the top is really just controlling which clips are active at what point. Now, if we want to, because of the design, we can build embedded timelines. Right? It's just a graph nested within the other graph. This allows us to do features like compounding. Right? If anyone's used other timeline editors for video or whatever, it's take a bunch of clips, merge them into one clip so that you can easily work with it. Because we're built on the same thing as animator controllers, right? We get natural interaction with state machines. And so this leads me in just a small thing. So because we've sort of changed the paradigm of the Playable API, it's no longer just in the realm of animation. We're making some API changes. And I know everyone loves when we change the Playable API. But the first big thing, and this seems almost trivial, but it really makes a difference, is right now the Playable API just deals with the little playables themselves. We're introducing a playable graph type that contains the playables, that manages the playables. And animators, you'll never tell an animator, hey, play this playable. What you're going to do is you're going to build graphs. And the graphs themselves are the things that are going to play, and they'll target whatever they need to do to play. Right? So this minor paradigm shift, but it really opens some doors for us. So animators themselves will know that they're being targeted and will automatically layer these things. Right? And so this is going to allow us to do gameplay to sequence. This is one of the biggest questions that I get whenever I tell anyone I work on timeline is, oh, can I go from gameplay into a timeline and then back? And this is how we're going to do it. So this also allows us to write tools which extend animation. Like we can push on animation controllers and pop them off. And you can build your own playable assets that maybe generate their own animation tree in some custom way and simply transition to them without destroying the data that's actually on the animator. So
I think one of the coolest things is the fact that even Timeline is built with this same API, so the community can create their own custom extensions and add-ons, and that extensibility is really, really powerful.
Right.
And here's the almighty blend from Mechanim into Timeline.
So in this example, what we've done is we've set up this character with a simple state machine, and it's very, very simple. He's just going to walk forward. But when he hits the target, just hit play. Right, there's a trigger on there that's going to start playing the timeline. And if you notice on the timeline itself, we've got a blend in and a blend out. So it's simply an animation that blends in and blends out. Right, so he's going to stop. He's going to play the shooting animation. So the animator controller is still running, but the timeline is taking priority, and then it's going to blend its way out. So this opens up a lot of doors and lets you do things without scripting that you normally need to script on the Playable API.
Yeah.
So something else that we've been playing around with is the idea of having IK overrides for your animations. Here the character's running a root motion sequence. Just, again, a number of clips tied with the Cinemachine blends. We have a custom target track, which are the look-at points for the IK. And if we scrub back, you can see he's not looking at anyone. But as soon as we turn on the IK targets, it does a blend right into the IK and then out at the end. This is extremely powerful, where you're going to be able to have, you can see in the future, hand controls, where during a cutscene you can reach for things or look at things, and have these overrides on top of your existing graphs.
We're a little heavy-handed with this, but it gets the point across. The other cool thing is that it's live, so you can actually grab the look-at object and move it around, and it'll update. So here he is noticing the strangely colored barrel. He didn't notice it the first time because the track was muted.
And
then, yeah, so it's, just think of what you can do with like hand placement, people walking up ladders, and how powerful this is to marionette your characters. So, oh yeah, and here's just a little, his feet are getting cut off. Let's fix the composition on him. A little bit of procedural handheld noise on there. Looks at the camera.
We're very excited to see what everyone starts doing with the timeline system and all of these pieces of the puzzle. Because it really is just adding to your toolkit as Unity and developers.
This is the real time. This is the, we're just going to animate what he's looking at here. So you can just grab the guy. And I think I'm grabbing the wrong thing here. Oh no, there he goes. Yeah, there's an update on that. So that's going to be very cool. Next is the scene track. And I'm really excited about this because it helps you take creating these sequences from start to finish. So you can see we're creating a bunch of, we added this new track, it's a scene track. And you're creating multiple clips, so I make a bunch here. And these clips can be a number of different things. The first one we show is storyboards, like art. You can blit the game screen with a piece of art. And what's cool about this is, okay, you've got some storyboards, you're working on a sequence. We took these from Homeworld Deserts of Karak, so we had whiteboard drawings, and then we go to animatic, to paint overs. And you can work out your timing and your pacing, all while your 3D assets are underneath. Oh, clapping someone. Yeah, right? That's fun. That part's really cool.
Yeah,
and then,
being able to build things up right from the animatic and then replace the sub-scenes or sequences as they're completed, it's extremely powerful.
And then here's what else you can do. You can actually load another Unity scene with a scene clip, or you can load a prefab. So you can manage assets, so you don't have these huge cutscenes with all the geo and everything in them at once. You can load them up and down as you need. So in this demo, and again, forgive our animations, it was thrown together really quickly, but she's going to walk around the room, and we've got the props, the sets in the rooms, loading and hiding as they're seen on camera. And as they're not seen on camera, we get rid of them. So
an interesting thing with this as well, we've got our green floating dot that's flying around. This is a mechanism or an animator character driving a nav mesh through timeline. So I've just keyframed the targets for the nav mesh, and it's actually setting the character's destination as it moves through. This is literally a 2-3 line custom track that we created. And the cool thing is you can actually scrub the timeline and see the target move, and the character will still keep chasing it. It's kind of interesting.
She's chasing it backwards. At the start, when we cut to that new camera, some of the geo popped in like a few frames late. So the scene track there, it's lower, it's in purple. And the blends are where we're keeping props up for the same time. So we're loading the next ones, and then she moves, and then we drop the last one. So you can get really efficient with your scene management, your asset management. And of course, it's still in memory, but you're not paying any rendering costs for this stuff. So yeah, this is exciting. We're really looking forward to making things with this. Shall we move on?
Sure. So here we're going to jump to a quick live demo for a little bit. So here's the scene you saw during the keynote. It's, again, a number of very simple tracks. You can, again, show and hide the different tracks. Just mute the old one. So these, let's fly back. So these are the virtual cameras from Cinemachine. Actually, I'll let Adam talk a bit more about that. But again, they have their own composer settings to apply to the main camera. So you work, again, in these virtual cameras and then combining them together into your master timeline. All of the different animation clips, again, they're just individual blends. You can move them in and out. Combine any number of root motion clips together.
Do that root motion change. You had that, the demo was switching the characters around. That was the bit that we were going to show here.
So here we have, again, this same sequence. I can jump over to this one, which is the exact same sequence with just different characters. So these two tracks are the exact same animation sequence that you can combine together. And here again, you can edit these clips directly in the animation window and see the changes directly in both. You get all of the new box select functionality for manipulating the keys. For the activating and deactivating game objects, again, you're just creating these custom little assets that you can then manipulate. In this case here, it's when we trigger the explosion at the end. So you can set up your timing for objects. You can, again, it's just an array of objects. You can either activate or deactivate them. It's just one example of our of the custom tracks that we have. Do you want to talk about Cinemachine a bit? Or?
Actually, I want to do a poll. You guys, how many of you are going to use this? You know, cutscenes are an obvious choice. So is that the main thing people are interested in, or what are some other options? Like, you know, hands, cutscenes. Who's going to use this? Cutscenes. What about like QuickTime events? Are people interested in that stuff? That's one, yeah. You know, what else? Has anyone got an application for this that they've been, yeah.
So we're saying having multiple objects that are interacting together. Absolutely.
Interesting.
And that is really one of the coolest parts, is the fact that you can have any number of these objects and have them interacting in very complex ways, but in a very designer or artist-friendly way.
What I'm trying to say is a meta animation.
Right. Cool. Yeah, we're very excited to see what everyone's doing with it.
Should we move on?
No, we can show a couple.
Okay. Do you guys want to see more of the Cinemachine stuff? Like, we could talk about this for a little bit. We've gone through it a bunch. I'm really excited to see what people create with this stuff, and just the idea of you know, you're not keying cameras. You set them to what you want to look at, and they do the job for you. So if you weren't at the keynote, there's this little, you know, the notion of just going between cuts or blending. And we didn't write this in the camera system per se. This is just timeline giving us all that blend information.
Here, actually, I can drive for a second.
Yeah, you got something?
So yeah, I can. Let's see, where's the other one? So the one interesting part with this is the nav, or the custom playable that I have. Here's the actual code for that. It's extremely simple. So we have a target that we've keyframed around the world, and again, in each frame, we're just literally reading it and calling the set destination on the nav mesh. That's the whole, or the nav mesh agent. That's the whole playable. It's really powerful to get some cool stuff done with very little code. Yeah.
There we go.
Let's see. What else can we show?
I think we moved on. Just move on.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can we go back to the
All right, the $10,000 question is, timeline's been shown in a few GDCs for a couple of years. We are currently in private alpha. We're looking at a public experimental beta in the new year. The Playable API, as Sean described, is available now. There are some changes coming in 5.6 as we expand it beyond just animations. And Cinemachine itself will be free on the asset store with the timeline beta. So you'll be able to play with this whole system in the new year. We're very excited to see what everyone's going to be doing with it. Now beyond that, what's next for timeline? So we've got a couple of these playable examples that we've been working on. Cinemachine's probably the most comprehensive one, but we're looking at adding a whole number of other custom track types, deeper integration with the audio system, as Sean described, being able to target audio mixers, The new post-processing system, being able to script your own post-processing on your timeline. These are all going to be directly integrated into timeline for launch. It's going to be very cool when that comes in. The multi-scene support, being able to load and unload scenes on the fly. We've got a preliminary version of it, but we're looking at expanding and enhancing that. And then a huge amount of work has been done on the animation window itself. The integration with it, being able to blend, layer the animations. It's very, very exciting. Yeah. So just wanted to say a huge shout out to the asset store creators. We didn't have a content team to put things together, so we were beg, borrow, cheat, and steal. Huge shout out to them. It allows us to create some content very quickly. And we want to jump right now into some Q&A. We've got a few minutes left. So there's a couple mics up front. If you have questions, please use the mics so that we can record it for posterity later on.
Hi. So runtime frame rates will be either 90 frames per second for VR or 60 frames per second for games. Can you choose the authoring frame rates? So 1 unit of time can be either 30 frames in a second or 24 frames in a second?
That's a great question.
Yeah. The question is, can we change what the frame rate that we author it at? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Actually, in the little gear.
Demo's not live.
Oh.
Yeah, on the far right, you can see the gear. You can actually switch to different NTSC or your PAL 24 or custom frame rates. You can actually author, and it's not just necessarily showing you the frames along the timeline, but you can switch to seconds, so your time tracker, if you're working in more of a traditional flow.
And I think on top of that, because we built the Atom demo with this, they were very, very particular about being frame accurate. So we've put a lot of work into the snapping and making sure things align perfectly on the frames. If you notice in some of the demos, we use a very, very high precision amount of high precision time values for that reason. So you really get a lot of accuracy on that.
Cool.
When you're asking about what it's going to be used for, you mentioned QuickTime. I don't know if you meant just kind of as a static output for playing back, so producing movies like Atom and stuff. There's a few companies that have been working with producing real-time movie creation, which I'm very interested in. What other aspects are you looking to add down the road? Because this is incredible what you've already done.
Yeah, obviously you saw the Otoy stuff at the keynote as well. There's going to be a very deep integration with their system, being able to render out. One thing we're looking at is being able to obviously play back in the game. I think for QuickTime events, we were thinking more in the game sort of nature, where you have more branching timelines or branching stories. That's something that you could definitely implement. As far as real-time or export video output, I think there's some work being done, but that's not really within the realm of timeline. That's kind of just in the normal video output render capture within Unity.
We hope it's open enough that you can configure it to do whatever you'd like to do with it.
Yeah, it looks
like that's the goal. And if it's not, we'd like to hear about it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi. At our studio, we've developed something very similar, albeit much less integrated and full-featured, but we use it for a very different use case. And I was wondering if you guys have explored applications for UI animations and transitions, because I could see that being hugely useful for that.
Yeah, all the examples that we have here are obviously showing off 3D content, but you could use it for 2D content. I think that's definitely a huge application for it.
We have talked about that, and we want to produce some demos of using it with the UI system. But it's generic enough that if you can animate the UI, then this can animate it as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So mine's, I guess, a bit of a two-parter. One is dealing with camera tracks and how you guys are handling that. Since you sort of have this sort of nested system, I'm assuming that not all timelines will require a camera. And second part of that is, what are you thinking of having multiple timelines running in parallel? So you brought up the possibility of QuickTime events. I'm thinking something like from the Metal Gear Solid series where there are several cutscenes. If you press a button, you get a different view from the cutscene. It's the same cutscene, but the camera changes. But the two cameras are running in parallel, and it sort of toggles between them.
So to answer the first question, yeah, absolutely. You can keyframe your own camera movements. Timeline is not tied to the camera itself. You can be driving animations and interactions without touching whatever you're doing with your camera natively. You can keyframe your own movements with cameras. Cinemachine just happens to be a very powerful way of doing procedural cameras, but it's not the only way for sure.
If you were to use it, because they're virtual cameras, you could easily write something where you can switch between multiple shots. And you're just calling another virtual camera and cutting to it. It's just like a cut, but you're sort of dynamically driving that. There's some things in the camera system which you haven't seen, but there's a whole, like a state machine set up with priority. And there's even controls for if the shot isn't good, move on to a subsequent shot. We'll be talking about this stuff later, but you asked it's on target. So it's feasible you can create a scenario where you're cutting to cameras, but you're always getting a good shot. So if it's occluded or if it doesn't have a clear view, it'll traverse down the list to another good shot. So yeah, kind of like procedural, make your own little video of the cutscene while it's happening.
You can also, again, you can definitely have multiple timelines running in the same sequence. The big space city that we had there was probably 4 or 5 different timelines all running in parallel. Only one of them happened to be driving the camera. We had ambient ones going on in the background. For workflow purposes, this is really, really a huge thing. So you can have your animators working on the front scenes, different guys working on the ambient background. You can have smaller timelines that are like opening doors or controlling these small little interactive bits. And each of them are independently worked. And because it's a reusable asset, you can reuse them throughout your environment. Cool.
So being able to seek and scrub through the timeline and having the audio and the animations jump to that point is awesome. Thank you. Can we also do that with the upcoming video player or movie textures?
I knew someone was going to ask about that. So,
You're welcome.
So integration with the new native video player is going to be one of the custom track types that we have. We're still working on it. We had 2 code bases coming almost simultaneous for this event, so we didn't have the time to do that. But yeah, you'll be able to have the native video playback as a custom track type within the timeline as well, which is going to be awesome. So.
Thank you.
This might be a stupid question, but can you script get, set, play, reverse, pause, ping pong, loop?
Like Flash, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll let Sean answer that. But
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the question was, can you script
jumping to
playback?
time or
The
jumping.
jumping time and things like that. Yes. So right now, the way this works, really this is just a playable graph. And on a playable graph, you can play it. You can scrub it. You can set the time however you like. There will be some limitations. Obviously, audio may not play backwards. Right, so if you ping pong, so something like animation, yeah, that works very well. Right, it can ping pong. You can, jump. You can do all sorts of different time-based effects. Just not all track types will support it natively. Typically, going backwards is one of those things that is difficult for some systems.
Okay.
So we've been brainstorming a lot of scenarios internally for how you would do some use cases, and how that jump to time, again, from the Flash background, being able to play a sequence, pause it, jump to time based on user input, continue having a whole interactive sequence depending on what the user selects. It's definitely doable within the API. You would probably have to create some either fire C# events from the playable graph. We've heard of companies talking to Playmaker and having their own the Playmaker actions being triggered from timeline and coming back into timeline as well. That's again part of one of the cool things with the extensibility is people are going to do stuff with it that we haven't even considered. It's actually very exciting as a result.
Thanks.
Hi. Yeah, my question was, if all the new stuff like looks great. Is there going to be any impact on any of the old systems or any obsolescence of those? Like specifically, there was one slide where it said that you won't be. It seemed to imply that you won't be able to call animator.play on something. Was that just more that's something people won't have to do, or are you planning on actually deprecating like that and other functions?
So the animator.play of a playable. Sorry, I probably should have been more clear about this on the slide. The play of a playable will be deprecated.
Okay.
And instead, you create your playables within a graph, tell the graph to target the animator, and you play the graph. So it's the functionality is still there.
But does that mean that you have to, does that kind of increase the number of assets you have to manage? Like for now, if you want to make a flag playing a looping thing, you have to have an animator control and a clip in the flag. Does that mean now you need to have a fourth asset, which is the graph telling the animator to play the flag, or?
I don't know the answer.
No, I don't think so. Well, previously you had to hold on to the playable. You may still want to do that, but you'd have to hold on to the playable graph too.
Okay.
But the playable graphs, you would manage the lifetime and
Okay,
that
thank you.
type of stuff.
Cool. Oh, there's people over here too. Okay. Yeah, all right, sorry.
So I think you did actually answer in the affirmative on my original question, which was going to be whether you can trigger like events in kind of the traditional way that you used to, and I'm sure you still could bury them somewhere in an animation, but that gets kind of awkward. So yes, it seems you can do that. Could you speak a little bit more about how?
C#, you can fire C# events just as a custom track type right now. I don't know if you want to talk to more the specifics of it.
Yeah, we actually have events embedded in there, and they're very similar to the UI events in the sense that you just pick what you want to target. So you can drop those on the timeline. None of our examples have it, but it is actually in timeline.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
Could you speak a little bit about how you handle object targeting, and like if you reference a scene asset, and can you play a timeline that's played on multiple different game objects but using the same timeline?
Yeah. So the question is, let me rephrase that. Playing the same timeline on multiple different objects, right? So the way we set it up is we've intentionally set up timelines as assets. And right now we have a component which plays them, and the component is what stores the bindings, so who you're targeting. So you're able to take that asset and play it on multiple different objects and set up different targets just in the inspector of the component.
Well, I guess like in this example, you have a couple game objects referenced in the timeline itself, right? Is that like how does that work if it's being played on an individual game object? Does that make sense?
So when you set up the timeline, you're creating an asset, but you're editing the instance in the scene. So these objects here, the challenger and the
Volland or whatever he is.
The binding of those to the track is not stored with the asset, it's stored with whatever's playing it. So when you play a timeline, you tell it play, and here's the scene bindings I want you to play. So you could play this, and grab two completely different characters and play it with those.
Okay, thanks.
When you jump to time, will you end up in a deterministic state? Like, will it fire all the events off in between? You know what I'm saying? Like, when we've written this before, players just mash through the cinematics, and if a sword were drawn and you enabled it in the hand, and they skip that part of the animation, are you doing anything to collect that up and make sure we end up in a one state?
Yeah, so the question is, are we properly handling jump to time? And it's a qualified yes. Obviously, if we give you an event track, all those events are fired, but if you're jumping time, there's no guarantee. We can't guarantee what state your events have left the scene in, but in terms of the clips themselves, the clips automatically do the right thing. So if you have an event which sends off or enables an object, right? When we scrub back, we can't tell that the intention is to disable that object. So using events is tricky. And this is one of the reasons why we want to make custom clips so easy to use, because we want you to make your things predictable, right? So everything that we do, we make sure that it is deterministic, and the custom stuff you write, there's a little bit of responsibility on the user.
Yeah, like if you're firing an event that says cutscene over, collecting and sort of managing what that means for your game would probably be your responsibility.
Yeah.
The hiding and showing of game objects within the cutscene, once it's done, they would at the very end they would still be in the state that they are. But if you're jumping around time and so on, it would be very difficult. So yeah, there's like a yes with a caveat.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Some states cannot be undone.
This is going to actually build on that question.
Okay.
With time-based sequencers that I've used in the past, I've had issues where I get the occasional frame drop, so my time doesn't match up, and somewhere in there I was supposed to be modifying properties, and I lose those property modifications. Does Timeline in any way make sure that I get those property changes regardless of a frame drop?
Yes, it does. So in the case of the events, when you set the event at a time, it fires at or after that time. That is the way we've set it up. So, and again, events are tricky for that reason, because games typically can drop frames. So with events, there's no guarantee that you can say exactly occurs on this time. But with a clip, if it's a deterministic clip, then yes, then it's always guaranteed.
Thank you.
Something that was sort of missing from Mechanim and animator things are controlling the interpolation mode when you blend. Will you be able to change that or set it in the timeline tool?
Sorry, can you
So
repeat?
having like ease in or out for the
Exactly.
blends or
Linear or...
Oh, yeah,
so on.
yeah. The timeline tool lets you customize your blends.
All right, thanks.
yeah, we can actually. Let me just select a clip here with a blend. Each of them has their own ease in and out curve, and you can control that directly within the clip itself.
So just to follow up his question about skipping around, like obviously with user scripting, that's like there's a lot of caveats there. But like, how would it handle like if a character has root motion that moves them here, and then their hand animates, and then you spawn an apple at their hand joint, and you skip around? Is all like the kind of built-in Unity way of stuff going to be expected to be robust in that sense of like, if I skip, the apple will be where it would be if he had played the animations and rooted there?
So if he spawns the apple, and the apple is not controlled by the sequence?
Well, if it is, I mean, if there's like, you know, if I have like the apple deparent or something using the timeline methods, will all of that, well, we'll just generally will root motion and stuff support skipping and all that?
Root motion itself, yes. Okay. Root motion you can scrub back and forth, and we've had the animation team working pretty hard on that.
And like joints as well are simulated. So if events happen at key off of joint positions, the ramifications of those events will be consistent.
Right.
Okay.
Cool. We're down to the couple minutes left. So last couple questions.
This is my third one, but I'm very interested in what you guys have built here. So in other playback tools like this, there's always an influx of problems with the editor state while you're working. As you're scrubbing, you know, everything's moving around, but maybe you go and start working on something that's not keyed. The save state, when you go and save your scene, does it leave it where it was? Does it reset it to before you were working, reset it at the beginning?
So that's a very good question, and that's something we're actively working on. We're working with the animation guys because they do this same type of thing for recording. There's animation window changes that we talked about, so they're looking at this. There's a couple other people in Unity looking at this. And we have mechanisms inside the graph itself if you want to save and restore to state as well. So, so yes.
Yeah. The timeline itself, because it's an asset, it's saved again even in play mode. It's where you get in the scene interactions and some of the scene binding. That's where things start to get complicated, and making sure that things are going on the undo stack properly and so on. So that's kind of a huge area that we've been working on recently. So cool. Thank you very much. Let's.